Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reserve Seating. Rob is in the spirit of this review already. I love it. We are talking about Firestarter from 1984, directed by Mark L. Lester and starring Drew Barrymore. Hold on, David Keith, not Keith David,
Not
David
Keith
Keith,
David, David Keith,
and George C. Scott and Martin Sheen.
and Heather Locklear,
Heather Locklear is in this.
and
Art Carney,
Louise Fletcher,
Louise Fletcher.
a barn.
So we watched this because this is the back end of a double feature that we did with last week's Dolores Claiborne review, where we each picked an unseen Stephen King movie and watched it. So Rob's choice was last week. This week was my choice. One of the very few remaining Stephen King film adaptations I had yet to see.
Mm-hmm.
I've owned this Blu-ray for years, have meant to watch it during multiple scary movie months. I think it was just the cover art because there's something about like 80s children in peril that like really bothers me. Like more so than any other decade, like 80s children in peril.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like I remember when I was a kid just being traumatized by there was a lot of like news stories and made for TV movies about like children in peril. So I always thought like everywhere was a threat, everything was dangerous. And Firestarter, I think, brought that back a little bit. Um, because the adults in this movie are, without hiding it, just the worst people
Yeah.
in the world. They run this outfit called the Shop, which sort of reminded me of Jacob's Ladder in a way, where they experiment on Vietnam soldiers with hallucinogenic drugs to make them into
Was
super soldiers. So this is similar to that, where they give plucky young kids, curious folks, people who need a few extra bucks,
horny college students.
horny college students. So Heather Locklear and David
David
Keith
Keith.
both get super soldier shots.
Yes.
They have a child
They
played by
do.
Drew Barrymore. Drew Barrymore is the most mutant of the mutants. She's kind of like Dark Phoenix.
She is.
And then she turns into, like, she can control fire and explosions and fireballs and things like that with her mind.
Yeah.
She can boil water with her mind. It all culminates in an epic finale where she turns into Carrie White.
Yeah. Pretty
and
much.
just and they deserve it because the Shop sucks.
Carrie White with fireballs. Until next
I'm
time.
having trouble approaching this review because this movie upset me. So
So let's talk about why this movie upset you, Adam. Let's talk about that.
I think it's because the adults in this movie are so creepy,
Yes.
and their bedside manner with this child is wholly inappropriate. No more so than George C. Scott.
Yeah, who are you referring to?
George C. Scott plays, I think his name is Redbird.
Yeah.
Yeah, George C. Scott is kind of like an actor who they're like, we want you to play a creep, and he's like, which flavor creep? And he's got like any flavor you want of
Yeah.
creep.
Yeah.
At first, the movie didn't. Well, the whole thing creeped me out because I talked about like the testing scene, and that really bothered me. But when George C. Scott shows up and he's playing off of Martin Sheen, who's kind of doing like, right after the Dead Zone,
He's
his
doing
second
Dead Zone.
Stephen
Yeah.
King villain. George C. Scott is like karate chopping people in the face and like
Yep.
smushing their noses into their skulls.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, how do I explain? Like Halloween 3. I'm like, okay, this is kind of like goofy, like weird stuff like that.
Sure.
But then he goes into like, I'm going to become really good friends with Drew Barrymore, who's like 8. And I'm going to like get inside of her, and I want the rights to her after you're done with her. And I want like basically her essence, and I'm going to take it with me into the afterlife. And another thing that kind of bothers me more than anything with characters in movies, especially villains, is when they're kind of like zealots. They don't have to be like religious zealots, but like in their mind, they're doing things for the greater good
Right.
and they're determined in that focus. And I feel like George C. Scott is very much that.
It,
So,
it's a character that made me want to read this book more because
okay.
I kept thinking to myself, there's a character here that's not maybe quite being properly conveyed in the cinematic version of this story, and I'm very curious to see what that character was on the page.
So I can't really say I enjoyed this experience. I'm glad that I saw it the one time. I think it's well made. I think you had mentioned that it sort of is interesting for like a Mark Lester movie because it's sort of atonal to like some of his other stuff.
I said we were texting back and forth because we were both watching at the same time, and I said it feels like Mark Lester is sort of letting go of some of his sort of exploitation sensibilities because he wants to make a blockbuster, which led for me to a lot of the action being very static and a lot of the like I was actually driving today and I was thinking about this like Lester's really good at propulsive action and like telling a story in a cool way. Like we just, we talked about we've talked about a couple Mark Lester movies, I think. Um,
Yeah.
and this one is much more character focused, character based, especially in that middle chunk. And he's not as good at dramatizing propulsive interpersonal action, which
Mm,
feels like he was trying to do because he wanted to make the movie a little bit, not prestigious, but a little bit more applicable to a wider audience. And I
yeah.
feel like this movie was him, unfortunately, fighting some of his more kind of grindier instincts. And I think they would have served him well in this story. And
Yeah.
the movie turns out kind of bleh for me.
Yeah, I don't think it's like grimy and look. I agree with you. It's much more polished and kind
Yeah.
of static, as you said, is a really good way of putting it. I feel like this movie's sort of subversive a bit in a way that his other movies maybe aren't because they're flagrantly exploitation.
Yeah.
Where this one, it feels like it could be E.T., Starman, that type of thing. Although it is an R-rated Stephen King movie, but like
Right.
I'm almost taken off guard by it because of like the father daughter relationship and Drew Barrymore being the kid and stuff like that. I'm not expecting it to go into like Carrie territory,
Yeah.
and it yeah it really does. So I mean, like I think this movie's very effective. I don't know if people watching this who are like Firestarter heads are like kind of giggling at me. They're just like, why does this bother you so much? But
Yeah.
like, yeah, I don't know. It just really kind of like in a way that horror movies usually don't, kind of just weirded me out.
This is probably, I know there's a lot of people out there probably really excited that we're watching Firestarter and probably right now very disappointed by what we're talking about and being like, why are they focusing on like the child horror? Like I understand. I totally get that. I know this movie is like
Yeah.
very, we understand King heads, horror heads. A lot of people love this movie and that's great. I can understand why people love this movie. I don't love this movie. I like for reasons I mentioned before. I will say though that it did make me want to read the Stephen King book because now that I'm in the midst of this King read, I can see those archetypes and go, oh, I bet like I can see how this character was described on the page as opposed to how he's being described, especially the David Keith role. I did not love his performance in this. I thought it was bad. But I can also see how on the page this is a very Stephen King-esque character. I was thinking a lot about The Stand, folks who know The Stand, government stuff, one loner, kind of different elements of that story in there too. I can see a lot of King's building blocks now that I'm starting to recognize some of his character types.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, as you say, Carrie is a huge, part of this as well. Um, so I can definitely see like why people like this. I thought the last act, that whole last sequence with the fire, spoilers, there's fire in a movie called Firestarter.
Yeah.
That stuff is really cool, really inventive special effects and all that. I think the George C. Scott performance is like bonkers. It's like off the wall. Just some of the stuff he says. I'm just like, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? Did you just say that in the movie?
Yeah. Yeah.
Overall, the movie didn't do much for me.
I thought it was funny at the end, and this is just me seeing the movie through 2023 eyes when her and Art Carney are hand in hand and being like, everything's going to be okay now while they walk into the New York Times building.
Overall, this one was very like I was kind of like, oh, like I told you I was. I watched it on a rainy Sunday afternoon, and it was not the right environment to watch it because I was fighting nappy time the whole time.
Yeah. Let's talk about early 80s movies for a second, because sometimes like I'm watching Firestarter or even something like lighter like Tootsie or Author or something like that. And I'm just like, this is a whole different world of movie like that only existed for these 5 years,
Yeah.
like from 1980 to say like 1984. It's like really interesting that I don't know, it's like a little bit of leftover from the 70s, but everything feels so much more grounded in the day to day, even though it's like fantastical elements like something in Firestarter. I just find it such a unique time in movies. If this were on a double or triple bill and was like the first or second movie, you would find me outside like holding a cigarette.
You would have to take it. It would be a patented Adam Risky walk. You have to take a walk out. He's
I
like,
would have to go for a walk around the block.
yeah, just go.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us. Sorry that this review was probably a little unorthodox compared to
Sorry.
what you were
Yeah, I
expecting from
know.
a Firestarter review. That's on me more than anything.
Oh,
But I had fun with this past couple of weeks.
yeah.
We're gonna be back. We've got something really exciting for August. We're going to be doing a 30th anniversary celebration of some of the movies from the summer of 1993. But before that, we will have a special episode next week where Rob and I are just going to be like real casual, real loosey goosey, and just kind of talk about whatever we're thinking about when it comes to the movies.
Lots of stuff in the movies going on right now. We thought it would be time to not quite a mailbag, not quite a gripe house, but just a check in. We're just going to check in and just
Yeah.
talk about stuff.
Like for instance, I took a look at the movies I've watched in 2023 so far, and I could make a solid top 8 right now.
I could not, so we'll talk about that.
So I even though I'm kind of usually the guy who's like movies are on the downswing, like I found some good ones this year.
I just watched all the Alien movies, so
I'm
maybe we'll talk
excited to
about
hear
that.
about that. Yeah.
Not for the
So
first time or anything, but like just again, just because.
yeah, and you watched them all in one day.
I watched 3 of them in one day, and then the rest of them in another day. So yeah, but
Okay.
close. Yeah.
All right, put a pin in that because I'm curious to see what that experience is like watching them in that close succession.
Yes.
I saw Pirates of the Caribbean in like an old AMC that had not been refurbished and it was scary.
Yeah.
So we could talk about like when you go out of town and you go to a movie theater you're not used to and how you're just like, this is somebody's main movie theater. How does it not scare them? All right. So until next time, everyone.
These seats are on fire.
I'm too soon, bro. I can't even watch X-Men. This movie fucked me up. Sorry. Bye. Bye, everyone.